Welcome to another episode of Erik Wait Whiskey Studies, and in this video, gonna do a head-to-head with the Glenfiddich 12-year-old single malt Scotch whiskey and the Glenfarclas 12-year-old single malt Scotch whiskey. Now, in most head-to-head videos that I've done and other people do, typically it's just to see which one is preferred and which one is recommended. But this being a whiskey study channel, there is more to it than that. Recently did a video of the Glenfiddich versus the Glenlivet 12-year-old, and more or less my personal preference was for the Glenfiddich over the Glenlivet. The Glenlivet was much more expressive and sort of vibrant and floral. The Glenfiddich, a little earthier. It had sort of like this creme brulee note, slightly a little earthy, little leafy note. And I put a comment in the video that Glenfiddich, Springbank, and Glenfarclas all use direct fire stills. And I think it makes a significant impact on the profile of the whiskey, although I think depending on whether your whiskey is peated or not, or whether the barley is peated or not, can sort of mask that character. So this is a Hazelburn 10-year-old, which made my top 10 for 2023, along with two other bottles, the 15-year-old and the 10-year-old from Springbank. What I really liked about this is it had a unique characteristic that I believe comes from the direct fire still. The Springbank and the long grow, Springbank is moderately peated, 2.5 times distilled. The long grow is double distilled and heavily peated. I think that peat covers up a little bit of the notes that you get from a direct fire still. Now, you may not know what a direct fire still is. Traditionally, to heat up a still to then get essentially almost boil, more or less, your 8% beer in the wash still to get it up to around 22-23% ABV, that it would then go to the condenser, go back to a liquid, and then you would put it into your spirit still to then get it up to 65 plus ABV. And then after that, it would go through a spirit bank to then do your cuts. Traditionally, a direct fire would be used to heat up the still. Now, this is a handy little teaching tool. This is a little decanter that looks like a still. So essentially your fire would be heating directly under this. Now, a direct fire like that does put a little bit more wear and tear on the copper in the still. These stills still last for maybe 40 years, and then they have to be replaced or patched. When I was at the Springbank Distillery Whiskey School in July 2023, they were looking at either completely replacing or patching their still. They tend to wear more here where it curves. All right. So, most distilleries have changed from direct fire over into a steam coil. Less wear and tear, better control, but it gives you sort of a cleaner spirit, but there is a distinctive characteristic to the direct fire that some people prefer and some distillers prefer to be part of their profile. Glenfarclas, in fact, at one time, they had direct fire, then they went over to steam coil, and they're like, nope, we don't like it, and they went back to direct fire. Another reason why I had to go to steam coil rather than direct fire is there is a potential to sort of, I'm going to say, bake the beer that's in it, and for it to sort of get burnt and stuck to the inside of the still. And so what you have to do is, in order to keep that from happening, is you put a rummager inside of the still. A rummager is kind of like a sweeping chain that goes around and circles underneath the still. At Springbank, there's actually a little rod you can see if you can look behind the still. There's a rod that goes through the back of the still and then goes down to the bottom of the still, and then it rotates the rummager around it. in order to make sure that it is still rotating, right, because you can't see it inside the still, they put a bell on the back of the still, so it goes clink, 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 you know, so they know, so the stillman knows that it is still operating. So very few distilleries are still using direct fire stills, but it's a character that I like. Now, in order to maintain that as a distinctive, if you're doing all your whiskeys peated, you're probably masking it. If you use too heavy, I think of a sherry cask influence, I think you're sort of masking that. This distinctive of direct fire stills is subtle. It's not a big in-your-face characteristic, but it is one that I like. So, all that to say this, I want to do a head-to-head with Glenfiddich and Glenfarclas, both of these coming from direct fire stills, so that I can distinguish between these two bottles, but also reinforce my perception of the distinctive of a direct fire still. Now, I'm not going to do a head-to-head with the Hazelburn. That would not be fair. Hazelburn would absolutely blow these two away. This is such a superb whiskey. Such a superb whiskey. If you haven't seen my review of this, I'll put a link in the description down below and at the end of this video. I mean, it's just an absolute killer whiskey and a bit challenging to come by, whereas these are more readily available. Also, the profile of these whiskeys, this is at 40% alcohol by volume, and this is at 43% alcohol by volume, so very, 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 very close. This is American oak and European oak, and I already made a rant about that, but basically it's a way of saying bourbon oak and sherry oak potentially. Other than that, it just means the oak came from two different places, but they're not specifying as to what the previous contents of the cask was. Again, I already did a rant about that. I'm not going to go on and on. I'm guessing it means bourbon and sherry cask, but who the hell knows. The Glenfarclas, according to the website, 12-year-old, 100% Oloroso sherry cask. By the way, if you read on a bottle or on a website that just says sherry cask, or it says sherry seasoned, that may not be one of the classic styles of sherry. There are several different styles of sherry: Fino, Amontillado, Oloroso, Palo Cantado, and Pedro Jimenez, also known as PX. Oloroso, Amontillado, Palo Cantado are all made with the Palomino grape. Pedro Jimenez is made with the Pedro Jimenez grape, not even the same soils, done in the same region. And in fact, Pedro Jimenez is made from dried grapes. I know I'm getting off on a tangent. According to the website, this is Oloroso sherry cask. So there are a lot of sherry casks out there that just say seasoned sherry or just say sherry. It may be that it's not any of those types of sherry. Most common sherry cask used for Scotch whiskeys is an Oloroso sherry cask. But if it just says sherry, it doesn't specify Oloroso, and if it just says sherry seasoned, it may be they took some cheap sherry, put it into a cask, let it soak in a little bit for a little bit of time, dumped out that sherry, and then took the cask and then put whiskey into it, or spirit into it. So it's not even really one of the classic profiles of sherry. All right, now let's get back into this. One of the interesting things about Glenfarclas is 100% Olorosos. Look at the color. Golden. There could be some ABV in there, but who knows? It's golden, slight orangish character to it. The Glenfiddich looks pretty much the same. That gold with golden hues, a little bit of copper in there. They pretty much look the same. Could have ABV in it, don't know. I really like Glenfarclas. I've visited both of these distilleries. I like that it's family owned and it's got a lot of tradition to it. I wish their core range had more ABV in it, but whatever. I think they're still value priced in terms, and the availability of age statements from Glenfarclas is fantastic. And I think quality price ratio, they're still on the money for that. All right. So what I want to do is compare these two. Am I picking up that similar trait of being a direct fire still, and then which one do I prefer? And should either of these show up in a blind tasting test, would I be able to recognize them? Let's start with the Glenfiddich on my left. So the fruit character is mostly apple. It could be like an apple that you cut it open, it started to brown a little bit, it's been sitting on your countertop. Or a little bit like apple pie. It has a little bit of citrus, I'd say just a hint of lemon. It has that just a tinge of an earthy character, like a dried leaf. But also a character that reminds me of a creme brulee. You know, the crispy charred part on a creme brulee. Some honey. Maybe even I wasn't picking this up before, just a hint of apricot. The Glenfarclas. The Glenfarclas, particularly after just smelling the Glenfiddich, is coming across differently than what I remember. If you don't do head-to-heads at home, I highly recommend it. You'll learn a lot more about whiskey. There are things that will pop out that you didn't notice before because you're trying it in comparison to another. And if you have a bunch of friends, get them together, maybe blind everybody, blind taste everybody, see what else thinks, see what else picks up. It's a fun evening. It's different, but similar descriptors in terms of like apple pie, a little bit of citrus, that little bit of that, it's a subtle leafy character, that hint of creme brulee, maybe butterscotch, vanilla, and baking spices. Ooh. It's funny, just going here and now going back, there's more citrus popping up out of the Glenfiddich. But it's probably because as you're smelling, your senses are bringing in all this information, and you can sort of overwhelm your senses in your brain. So there can be certain elements you're not picking up anymore. It's not that they're not there, it's just your brain has gone on sensory overload with those particular characteristics, and so you can't smell anymore. It's like you become nose blind to certain characteristics. This can happen with peated whiskeys. If you just smell and taste peated whiskeys all the time, and then you take a break from it, let's say a few months, and then come back to a peated whiskey, they will seem peatier, or they can seem peatier than what they were before, because doing peated whiskeys all the time, you start to become immune or nose blind to the peat. So they're not as big and as impactful as they were before. You still smell them, they're just not as much in your face. You just become accustomed to it, become acclimated to those aromas. It's kind of like if you worked at a gas station or around automobiles where there's a lot of smell of gasoline and oil, and you're working there every day, after a while you're not even going to smell it anymore. Whereas someone else coming from the outside that spent a whole lot of time around fossil fuels and sniffing them, they're like, whoa, man, that stinks. All right, on the palate. It's light, it's crisp, it's thin, the nose is confirmed, a little bit of apple, a little bit of citrus, lemon, just that faint note of creme brulee, burnt sugar, a slight leafy, earthy character. All those things, all those descriptors are the same, are just coming from the same trait. Vanilla and baking spices. Moderate length finish, pretty much the same front, middle, and into the finish. All right, so let me drink a little bit of water, and then we'll get into the Glenfarclas. On the palate, in terms of like mouthfeel, I mean, it's very slight, but you can tell the difference between 40 and 43. Just a hint more weight. Tasted by itself, the Glenfarclas might feel thin, but when you put it up against a 40% ABV, that 3%, you can tell the difference. Apple, baked apple, citrus, maybe a little bit of apple pie, vanilla. That creme brulee character is in there. Lemon, hint of earth. Golden raisins, sultanas. It's almost like a wine characteristic. It reminds me like a Chardonnay that doesn't have heavy malolactic fermentation, that doesn't have those big buttery notes on it. All right. Hands down, Glenfarclas is better than the Glenfiddich. It's richer, has a better mouthfeel, has a better transition, and has a longer finish. But there is a similarity in that, and I've mentioned a bunch of times, that creme brulee character that is coming from the direct fire still. That is a character that I prefer. So that these don't seem like super sweet or super floral whiskeys. They're a little bit more on the rustic side. They're a little bit more on the earthy side. They're a little bit more on the less candy side. And I really, really like these. I think these, in some sense, are for a more mature palate rather than someone who's new. New people tend to be more towards on the sweet side and all that, but these are really, really, really nice. I am much more impressed with the Glenfarclas 12-year-old than I previously was. You know, score-wise, I'd give this like an 87. This I'd probably give it like 88, 89. Yes, I would like more oomph. I'd like more flavor. I'd like more transition. I'd like a longer finish. And a lot of these characteristics that are only going to come from either more age to it, or a little bit more ABV, but still really, really, really nice. Alrighty, that's it for this video. If you subscribe to this channel, and thank you very much. If you have not yet subscribed, if you like watching my videos, I would greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe. Ring the bell to be notified for when I go live and post a new video. If you have these in your collection, I want to say, hey, give it a try. Do a side-by-side between these two whiskeys and learn something. If you understand what I'm talking about in these characteristics, then you can plug it in your brain. Hey, that characteristic, that distinctive characteristic, is not from the barrels. It's not from the fermentation. It's from the direct fire still. All right, until next time, Slàinte. Hey, don't forget to subscribe and check out these other whiskey videos.